President Biden and I stood up to the NRA and the gun lobby. Donald Trump bowed down. After the horrors of El Paso and Dayton, the former president said he would take action. And then he folded. He failed to stand up to the gun lobby.
Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Maxwell Frost of Florida. He is a member of the House Oversight Committee and a National Advisory Board member for the Biden-Harris campaign. Congressman Frost, welcome back to The Last Word. So the Surgeon General calls the gun epidemic a, quote, moral crisis. And polling shows that nearly 6 in 10 U.S. adults say that they worry sometimes, almost every day or every day, about a loved one being a victim of firearm violence. That's a solid majority for an issue. And the contrast couldn't be clearer between standing up and bowing down to the NRA.
Of course, the contrast couldn't be any clearer. And it's 60% of Americans that say they worry about themselves or a family member dying due to firearms. And it's even more. 90% of Americans want things like universal background checks and want action. And so even more, a larger percent of Americans actually want something done. On one hand, you have President Joe Biden, who signed the law, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Today is the 2-year anniversary of it. And I encourage people, go online, look at what the White House has put out. They've put out a progress report on exactly how this law has saved lives. And what we know to be true is gun violence, homicides around the entire country has gone down. And there's so much more work to do. That's on one hand. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who, when asked about mass shootings, said, get over it. That's his response to the families of Parkland, to the families of Uvalde, to the families of the children who are gunned down every day across this country. Get over it. That's unacceptable.
You know, the Surgeon General's advisory notes Black Americans endure the highest rates of firearm homicides, while suicide rates are highest among veterans, older white individuals, and younger American Indian or Alaska Native people. As a National Advisory Board member for the Biden campaign, how is the campaign prioritizing these groups when it comes to reducing firearm violence?
In a very large way, the campaign is prioritizing in the way we communicate with voters, where we go and communicate with voters. But also on the other side, it's the action that the president's taken. I mean, if you look, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act has a record amount of money going towards what's called community violence intervention. This is giving money to community groups that work at identifying who's more likely to shoot someone and who's more likely to be shot. And funding these programs helps us end the violence before it happens. A lot of people, especially in Congress, want to talk about how to react to gun violence. I want to be a part of the conversation on how we make sure people don't die in the first place. And also, Jonathan, I want to impress on how big of a deal this is. Today, the Surgeon General of the United States declared gun violence as a public health crisis and emergency. This opens up it opens up a lot for us in terms of the politics of this on the Hill, and hopefully will allow us to get more done. You know, similar announcements and similar reports were put out by the Surgeon General before action was taken on HIV/AIDS, before action was taken on smoking, and on big ticket health issues. And so I think this is really a turning point in the gun violence prevention movement, and of course, thanks to the Biden-Harris administration.
Mm-hmm. Well, Congressman Frost, Dr. Jonathan Metzl wrote a Time magazine op-ed with the headline, "Guns are not just a public health problem," where he says, and I'm quoting, "Gun laws by themselves will have relatively little effect in changing the contours of the American gun debate if they don't go hand in hand with material investments that take seriously people's safety concerns and reward community cohesion over armed tribalism. Gun laws have the greatest effect if joined with investments in lived environment, fixing streetlights, creating parks and green spaces, jobs programs, and rebuilding civic infrastructure. Public safety and community resiliency can reduce gun crime at rates that supersede those produced by gun laws alone." It's a twofold strategy, but Congressman, how do we get the investment from elected officials?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I always tell people we're going to end gun violence in 3 different ways. We got to do it at the same time. 1, gun regulation and make sure guns don't get in the wrong hands. Two, ensuring that we invest in community violence intervention so that way community groups have the resources to break the cycle of violence. And number three, creating a country where people don't feel the need to use a gun to solve their problems in the first place. So if you want to be the gun violence person, you're going to also have to be the healthcare person, the jobs person, the poverty person, the infrastructure person. Oh, wait. These are all big bills that President Biden has signed into law over the last few years. And that's what we need to look at. It's not just one laundry list of gun regulation, even though it's important. I agree with what that article said. It's the totality of how we create an environment and a society where people don't need to turn to violence to feed their kids and to feed their families. And that's why our agenda, the Democratic agenda, is one that, yes, will make sure guns don't get in the wrong hands, but also is going to make sure that you have a good paying union job. You have what you need in terms of infrastructure to make sure that you can live the life you want to live. All these issues are connected, and it's part of what gives me so much hope, Jonathan, for the future of this country, especially young voters. You ask them what they care about, they're not going to tell you one thing. They're going to tell you several things because they see how all of these issues are connected. It's the same thing and how we're going to end gun violence.
You know, also, Dr. Metzl believes that the national gun debate is rooted deeply in political identity and that many in this country view guns not as a health risk, but a form of protection. So how do we change this divide to reduce gun violence?
Well, to what I was just saying, I mean, I think people need to feel safe. And look, I've had these very difficult conversations, especially during the Black Lives Matter uprising. To be honest, when I was on the streets, there were several of my organizers that I would be working with who told me, Maxwell, I'm going to go get a gun in a few days because we were threatened by white supremacists, because I was doxxed online, because I'm scared for my life. And the fact of the matter is there are real safety concerns for many people, black folks, poor people, working people, indigenous folks across the country who have a fear and want to arm themselves. And look, to be clear, this agenda isn't trying to disarm every American, right? This isn't what we're fighting for. What we're fighting for is responsible, common sense policy coupled with preventative measures so we don't even get to a point where the gun is fired in the first place. But making sure that we expand what public safety means is important. And for too long, Jonathan, when you think about public safety, the only thing we think about is law enforcement, which plays a big role in it. But what we also need to do is ensure that the community is also centered in the conversation of public safety. And again, community violence intervention programs are evidence-based. And if you look at the report from the Surgeon General, he uses data and facts to show how if we put more money into these community-based programs, we can really help end gun violence and also help our communities feel safer, because that is a real concern and we got to address it.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.